Marcus DeWitt had worked at Greenbrier Memorial Hospital in rural West Virginia for 11 years before the night that changed everything. He was 53 years old, a former Army medic who had seen combat in the Gulf War, a man who had watched friends die in the sand and learned to compartmentalize trauma the way some people organize their kitchen cabinets. Nothing rattled Marcus. Not the gunshot victims, not the decomposed bodies pulled from the river 3 towns over, not the children, God, especially not the children, who arrived too young, too still, too silent. He had built a wall inside himself, brick by brick, and behind that wall he stored every horror he had ever witnessed so that he could wake up the next morning, kiss his wife, pour his coffee, and go on living like a normal human being. But walls can crack, and what happened on the night of November 17, 2019 didn't just crack his wall, it demolished it entirely. The shift began like any other. Marcus clocked in at 10:47 p.m., 13 minutes early as always, because punctuality was the one habit the Army had drilled into him that he actually appreciated. He exchanged nods with Danny Reeves, the evening attendant who was already halfway out the door with his jacket slung over his shoulder. Danny mentioned something about a new arrival, a John Doe pulled from a hiking trail up near Seneca Rocks, but the details didn't stick. Marcus had processed hundreds of unidentified bodies over the years. They were puzzles, not people. That was how he kept himself sane. The morgue at Greenbrier Memorial was located in the basement, accessible only through a service elevator at the back of the building or a narrow stairwell that hospital staff had nicknamed the Throat because of the way sound echoed through it. The walls were painted a pale green that probably looked clinical and clean in 1987, but now just looked sick, like the color of someone about to vomit. The floor was polished concrete. The lights were fluorescent, buzzing faintly, casting everything in that flat, shadowless brightness that made every surface look fake, like a movie set waiting for actors to arrive. Marcus made his way to the main cold storage room, his footsteps echoing in the empty hallway. The air was different down here, thicker somehow, despite the industrial ventilation system that hummed constantly overhead. It always smelled faintly of chemicals, of formaldehyde and antiseptic, but underneath that there was something else, something organic, something that no amount of cleaning could ever fully erase. He checked the logbook. 3 bodies currently in storage. Mrs. Eleanor Vance, 87, died of heart failure, scheduled for release to Morrow and Sons Funeral Home in the morning. David Chen, 44, car accident, awaiting autopsy, and the John Doe that Danny had mentioned, male, estimated age mid-30s, found by hikers approximately 6 hours ago, cause of death unknown. Marcus decided to do a visual inspection of the new arrival before settling in for the night. It was standard procedure, or at least it was his standard procedure. Some attendants never even opened the drawers unless they had to, but Marcus liked to know what he was dealing with. He liked to look the dead in the face and remind himself that they were just bodies now, just vessels, just biology in the slow process of returning to the earth. He pulled open drawer 7. The John Doe was lying on his back, covered by a white sheet up to his chest. His arms were positioned at his sides, palms down, fingers slightly curled. His skin was pale, not the waxy yellow of long-term decomposition, but a strange grayish white, like marble that had been left out in the rain. His face was unremarkable, square jaw, thin lips, a nose that had been broken at least once. His hair was dark brown, matted with dirt and dried leaves. His eyes were closed. He studied him for a long moment. There were no visible injuries, no trauma that would explain a sudden death in the middle of the woods. Maybe a heart attack, maybe an overdose. The toxicology report would tell them eventually. He reached for the sheet to pull it higher, to cover the man's face completely, and that was when he saw it. The man's chest was moving, not rising and falling, not breathing, but moving. There was something beneath the skin, something shifting, like a small animal crawling underneath a blanket. Marcus froze, his hand still gripping the edge of the sheet, his brain struggling to process what his eyes were seeing. Bodies did strange things after death. Gases built up, muscles contracted. He had seen corpses sit up, seen them moan as air escaped from their lungs, seen them move their hands and twitch their legs. It was biology. It was science. There was always an explanation. But this was different. The movement stopped, and then, slowly, impossibly, the man's eyes opened. They weren't the eyes of a living person. There was no confusion in them, no disorientation, no flicker of consciousness returning from wherever it had gone. They were simply open, staring straight up at the ceiling, unblinking, utterly still. And yet Marcus could feel something in them, an awareness, an attention, like standing in an empty room and suddenly knowing with absolute certainty that you are not alone. Marcus took a step back. His heel caught on the edge of the floor drain and he stumbled, reaching out to grab the edge of the counter behind him to keep from falling. His heart was slamming against his ribs, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He told himself it was just post-mortem spasms. He told himself the eyes opening meant nothing, that it was just the muscles relaxing, that it happened all the time. But the man's head was turning. It moved with a terrible slowness, like a rusted machine grinding back to life, the tendons in his neck creaking audibly in the silent room. His eyes, those flat, dead, staring eyes, tracked across the ceiling, then down the wall, then across the floor, and then they found Marcus, and they stopped. For 5 full seconds, neither of them moved. The John Doe stared at Marcus. Marcus stared back. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The ventilation system hummed. Somewhere in the distance, through layers of concrete and steel, a phone was ringing. The world continued on, oblivious to what was happening in that basement room, oblivious to the fact that Marcus DeWitt was standing 3 feet away from something that should not be possible. Then the man smiled. It wasn't a natural smile. The muscles pulled back too far, exposing gums as gray as the rest of his skin. The lips stretched until they looked like they might tear. No sound came out, no breath, no voice, nothing, but the smile widened and widened and widened until it seemed to take up half of the man's face. Marcus ran. He didn't remember making the decision to run. He didn't remember his legs moving, didn't remember slamming through the morgue doors, didn't remember sprinting down the hallway toward the stairwell. He only remembered the sound of his own breathing, ragged and desperate, and the pounding of his footsteps on the concrete floor, and the absolute all-consuming certainty that if he looked back, if he stopped for even a second, something terrible would happen. He took the stairs 3 at a time, his hand gripping the railing so hard that his knuckles turned white. He burst through the door at the top, into the bright lights and antiseptic smells of the first floor, and he kept running until he was outside, standing in the parking lot, gasping for air beneath a sky full of stars. He called his supervisor from his car. His hands were shaking so badly that he could barely dial the number. He told Dr. Felicia Marks everything, the movement under the skin, the eyes opening, the head turning, the smile. He expected her to tell him he was imagining things. He expected her to tell him to go home and get some sleep and come back in the morning when he was thinking clearly. But instead, there was a long pause. And then Dr. Marks said something that Marcus would never forget. She said it quietly, almost reluctantly, as if the words were being pulled out of her against her will. "You're not the first person to report something like this." She told him to go home. She told him to take a week off, paid leave, and not to speak to anyone about what had happened. She told him that a special team would handle the John Doe from here. When Marcus asked what she meant, what team, how handle, she simply repeated that he should go home and not ask any more questions. Marcus never went back to Greenbrier Memorial Hospital. He submitted his resignation letter the following week, citing personal reasons, and he moved with his wife to a small town in Ohio where nobody knew his name. He found a job at a hardware store,
stocking shelves and helping customers find the right size of screws. And for a while, he thought he had escaped. He thought he had left that night behind him, locked it away behind a new wall, a stronger wall. But sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and his wife is asleep, and the only sound is the soft ticking of the clock on the nightstand, Marcus finds himself lying in bed, staring at the ceiling. And he wonders if somewhere, in a cold room beneath a hospital he'll never return to, something is lying in the dark, staring at the ceiling too, waiting, smiling.